GA starting, but prior to that, I also had men's and women's soccer and men's and women's golf. So it was a lot of teams and a lot of student athletes, but I'm sure anybody that's in that situation can kind of attest. It can seem like herding cattle, herding cats in and out. Like, listen, Tyler talk it. I'm sure he kind of relates to it. But at the same time, it is a lot to do, but you get to see a ton of different body types, training backgrounds, injury histories. So there is kind of that silver lining in having so many athletes. Yeah. But I just want to start off by saying thank you, Coach Ramos, Manchester University, for putting this on. I'm sure there was a lot of loops to jump through and paperwork to fill out to get started with it. But so just thank you to them and to the media staff that's putting this on. It's great to have them come in on a Saturday and stream this. And then thank you to all you for coming. There's a lot of things we could do on a Saturday. We could be personal stuff, family stuff. So it's just great that we're coming in here to get better, get yourselves better, get your staff better, and get your student athletes better. So thank you. What we got next? So what are the two main ideas that I kind of hope to get across today? This is kind of how I think of progressions, regressions, modifications. This is in no way the way to do things. This is just kind of how I've kind of evolved over the years. So what I say today is not the way. This is just kind of the way that I do it. So I just encourage you to kind of develop your system. Continually ask why, seek more information as you kind of go about and develop it. And then also kind of as we do modifications, just like we would program, continually ask why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What's the student athlete want? What's the sport coach want out of this? Kind of what they're looking. Dan John, I'm not sure if anybody follows Dan John, but he's got a great quote in that the goal is to keep the goal, which I feel like maybe in our society it's always, I'm going to do this program, then I'm going to do this thing, then I'm going to do this thing. So I think as coaches, it's kind of our responsibility to kind of keep everyone focused on what the goal is. So this is kind of how I do it. I would just kind of encourage you to kind of write it down, kind of think through your process, kind of put a deadline on how you're going to go about programming through modifications, through your program. Don't let I need to have the perfect modification for everything before I get started. Just make your plan and kind of evolve as you go. So when I kind of start programming for a team or for a student athlete, I kind of think, I always start with why, and why are they here? What are they hoping to get out of this? So kind of this talk, why did I pick this talk to kind of discuss today? I kind of started with, pain's probably something we're all going to go through ourselves, personally, professionally, with our athletes that we work with. I don't know if there's a day that goes by that somebody's not kind of banged up with something that we go through. So student athletes kind of give me a hard time, and when I'll be lifting in the weight room and they might come in and get something else in, and they give me a hard time that my warm up is all I do is warm up the whole time. So I kind of tell hey, the older you get, if you lift hard for an hour when you were 20, when you're 30, 40, that lift gets smaller and smaller, and your warm up gets longer and longer. So they give me a hard time about that, but it's just something that we're always going to have to go through. And then I want to see athletes succeed, and so I kind of want to modify stuff to set them up for the best success they can. I feel like when I first started, at least for me, when I first started in the profession, it was very selfish in that I wanted to succeed for me to succeed. But then the older I get, the more you want your athletes to succeed and see them do better on the court. So I think it's going to be long days, usually low pay in our profession, but if you're in it for you, those days are going to be longer than it's going to feel a lot longer. That pay is going to be a lot less. But if we're in it to see the student athletes succeed, it kind of makes that jagged little pill, a little easier to swallow. So setting them up for success, and then not letting obstacles stand in our way. It's like, yeah, you may be injured. Maybe you're banged up after that game last night, but there's still something that we can work on to get you better today, so we can play better that next time out. All right, so usually when I talk to athletes or even coworkers about modifications with exercise with a certain injury, I usually come across like three main paths that people take, and one I call is like the brick wall method, and that like I may have tore my labrum, but this is usually more like former athletes, sport coaches that may come in, but it's, maybe I tore my labrum, but I was gonna bench press today, and I will bench press today no matter what happens. So like they will continually just bang their head up against that wall, because that's what they think that's the only way to get to where they want to go, or they're stubborn, or they think that's what they have to do because they saw it on YouTube or whatever. The next one is kind of like, if that's at one end of the spectrum, at the other end is, I just need a little rest, and rest is defined by watching TV, like taking a week off and binge watching Stranger Things or whatever, kind of whatever people are watching these days. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. And then closely related to that is I couldn't think of a better example than this commercial. I'm not sure if anybody's seen this commercial, but it's the woman from Progressive, and she's just barely riding the bike and like texting on her phone. But like I think of like, I get a student athlete who jams their finger at basketball practice, and they come in to lift after, and I was like, well, I jammed my finger, so I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do today. Or if it's, they told me to do lower body, so I'm just gonna do this on the bicycle. It's like, well, I see what you're saying, but that's not really, I don't think when the athletic trainer said lower body only, they meant you just barely, 1 RPM a minute on the bike. So that's kind of a little bit of the why, with the talk, but kind of feeding off of that, like why should we work around aches and pains? A few quick ones. There's a lot more. We want to keep and build that habit. I'm sure Coach Palmer can kind of relate. Like you just want kids to be there and just kind of build, like get it in their mindset that you need to be here. We're here to work. That's kind of what we want to do. A great book on habit building, if you're interested in that, is Atomic Habits by James Clear, which if you're familiar with it, great book, very, very practical, ton of examples, kind of easily to implement. And then kind of from a personal standpoint, I think we can kind of, about keeping and building habits. Like you might go on vacation for 10 days, and if you've trained a ton up to that, but you kind of fall out of that habit, you want to kind of keep that habit going. And for me, I'm kind of lucky in that I can ride my bike to work, which is nice, just a couple hours away. But, in the fall, after riding for 6 months or so, I might ride till like it's in the upper 30s outside, and not really notice the thing. Whereas, once it starts to get icy and snowy and cold and I don't ride in the spring, it's like, it's 40. I'm not going to start riding my bike until, again, it's like 60. So like we all kind of get caught in that inertia of when we do it for 6 months, it's kind of easy to just kind of keep rolling with it no matter what's standing in our way. Whereas, if we haven't done it, then it's got to be like the Goldilocks effect, and that everything has to be perfect before we start going again. So with our student athletes, I want to keep that habit. So, yes, you may be in a boot and non-weight bearing, but you come in and we'll figure out something for you to do. We'll do something to get better. And then kind of along those lines, work ethic, mentality, mental toughness. I think these are kind of all buzzwords, at least at the collegiate level. But that's however you define those terms. I think we would all agree that like they're all built through consistency and doing something consistently. So maybe mental toughness is defined as doing 10 reps when it says 9, or running an extra 10 yards or whatever, but we would all say you need to do that over and over and over again, not just one time. So kind of we need to build that work ethic, mental toughness through consistency. And then finally, like it gives us an opportunity to work on weaknesses or limitations for that athlete. I've had a basketball player who needed to put on like 20, 30 pounds just because he was getting pushed around all over the court. Well, they play so much throughout the whole year, kind of as Tyler was saying. But then he had a shoulder injury, required surgery, so he couldn't play basketball for like 4 weeks. So that kind of gave him a fresh mentality of one thing to focus on, like I'm going to focus on getting bigger, getting stronger, meal prep, meal planning, taking in more calories. Yeah, so it just kind of gives us an opportunity to work on and focus on weaknesses. All right, so that was a little about the why. So I'd like to kind of explain like how I think about how I go about processing modifications for student athletes. The picture on the right is a picture of John Boyd, John Boyd was a fighter pilot during the Korean War. After that, he became a flight instructor, wrote numerous books. But what he's probably most famous for is the OODA loop, which is on the left. The OODA loop stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And that's a very simplified chart of it. There's a lot more detailed ones on the internet that you can find. But so starting with observe, so Boyd talked about there's like an open and a closed system for observing. So closed observing would be something that we kind of all fall into and that we kind of search for and to be like reaffirmed of our beliefs, so like confirmation bias, and that like I'm going to read about training that I do and I agree with, and then you read it and like, yeah, so I'm doing it right. So I'm just going to kind of keep doing what I've been doing the whole time. Maybe, listening to coaches or following coaches that only you agree with, and once they say something you don't agree with, then you kind of stop following and reading kind of what they're doing. Whereas an open system is the opposite of that, and you encourage and you read stuff that you don't necessarily always agree with. This could also be like maybe you add coaching staff that has a completely different coaching style than you or training style than you. Maybe you go and observe different coaches who are completely different from you and just try and kind of learn something from them as you go through it. Orient, the next step, is what Boyd called the focal point of the OODA loop. And he's got a quote that says, orientation isn't just a state you're in, it's a process. You're always orienting. And so then I kind of think of this as like interpreting your observations. And I feel if we don't continually orient and take in new information and process that, we kind of become the cliche of the coach, where if all you have is a hammer, then everything becomes a nail. So if you're not kind of refining your process and taking in more information, we can kind of get stuck in that same habit of doing the same thing all the time, which we do need to take in training information and kind of build that knowledge up, but we should also be broadening our knowledge, maybe taking in information from different fields, psychology, history, philosophy, kind of broadening our knowledge as well as increasing the height of that. And so kind of when I think of some different examples of like orienting, Coach Palmer mentioned like I had this plan for the day, athlete shows up, they just played 3 games, kind of adapting to that situation, kind of taking in that information from the athlete and then kind of changing what you had planned and orienting from a different different set of knowledge and a different set of information. Maybe this is another example that came to me was like a scheduling mix-up, and that like I thought I was going to have just the golf team, but then the baseball team got canceled, and they talked to another coach and said they could come in. So now instead of having 9 athletes in the weight room, I have 39. And how am I going to kind of juggle that and get that to go? So that's kind of the mental processes that I kind of go through, when thinking about modifications. But into a little bit more of the application. These two pyramids, the one on the right is from Mark Verstegen. The one on the left is kind of adapted from Al Vermeil, a book by Al Vermeil, Al Miller, Johnny Parker, and I'm going to butcher Rob's last name, but Rob Panariello. Where they're similar. They're different, but I think they're very similar in kind of like what they're looking for. I think they both, put movement quality, position, pattern above adding strength on top of that. I think the saying is adding strength on top of dysfunction. We don't want to do that. We kind of want to make sure our pattern, position is right and square, and movement quality is square before we start adding on strength and power. So usually, like maybe you have an athlete who can't quite do power, we can always move down a rung on that ladder, move down a level on that pyramid. Maybe they're not cleared to do strength work yet. Well, we can kind of work on movement quality, position, patterning, and then kind of looking at this more, I wish I would have kind of merged both of them into making movement quality and just make one big pyramid out of that. So we'd have speed, power, strength, work capacity, and then under that, pattern and positioning. So I think we can always move up or down kind of depending on the athlete's needs and kind of what they need to modify with that. Sorry. All right, so the how. So like what are the main modifications, regressions, kind of that I look to do with student athletes? Number one is usually they're using way too much weight or intensity for their skill level and what they should be doing. I mean, I don't know how many times it's, Coach, exercise X is bothering me today. And so then I'll go, oh, okay, well, come show me what you're doing. And then we get over there and it's a bar, kettlebell, or dumbbell, or whatever they're doing. And I kind of scratch my head like, have you ever done that much before? It's like, no, I was just feeling good. So I just figured I would just try it and grab it and go for it. It's like, okay, let's back off, 20, 30% and see how you feel, like what you normally do. And then it's like, yeah, that feels fine. Like, okay, well, let's just stay here. So usually we back off on intensity. Maybe somebody's trying to jump a real high box and they got to catch it real low. And it's like, okay, well, you're just jumping way too high. We just need to back off on that intensity and that load. And kind of with that, sometimes there'll be complaints that this is way too easy. I'm not really feeling like I'm getting anything out of this. So we can up the reps or up the volume. Maybe we decrease that tempo where we're going, 3 to 5 seconds up, 3 to 5 seconds down with our tempo, with the eccentric and concentric or ascent and descent. And then if those two aren't happening, we'll decrease that range of motion. So if there's, maybe we have a student athlete who, that low end range of that deadlift is kind of aggravating for low back knees, whatever it is. We can just kind of turn that into a deadlift from a box, an RDL. We can kind of shorten that range of motion, but still get a good training effect and still get some good loads, intensities out of that. So that's kind of like if we want to keep that base exercise. Now we can also, maybe we modify the original exercise so we could, regress the exercise and kind of maintain that range of motion. So kind of how Coach Palmer was talking about, there's running warm-up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm sure we all have a progression for whatever that lift may be, A, B, C, D. Well, if D is bothering the student athlete, so let's say that's like a front squat, we can regress that to a goblet squat, and just kind of, that's a very simple modification that works a lot of the time. We can maybe change it into a unilateral exercise or increase some stability demands if they want to still, if they can't squat, maybe we single leg squat or a variation of a lunge to train those. We will have student athlete, like the student athlete that had the shoulder surgery, so he was in a sling for 4 to 6 weeks, but we still need to do some upper body training. So we would do one arm bench press, for example, and he would, I feel like the most pushback with that is like if it's going to be for a day, like a student athlete doesn't really have an issue with it. But if it's going to be for like an extended period of time, it's, well, I don't want to do that because this arm's going to be huge. This arm's going to be tiny when I get out of it. And it's like, I understand, but then, so then I'll try to kind of explain to them the best I can, and sometimes they understand and agree, sometimes they don't, of the crossover effect, and they're like, you can train, that one limb, and that other limb will get stronger just by the cross education, by the crossover effect. It's upper, lower, upper limb, lower limb. It can be big muscles, little muscles. However you train that limb, the muscle on the opposite side, that movement on the other side is going to kind of do the same thing. So I try to get that point across the best I can. And so at the bottom, a 7.8 to 11.9% strength gain on that opposite arm. So we're always going to be, they're never going to be equally level in strength, but I would rather have our strength be here than not do anything on either limb, and then when they come back 6 weeks later, we're way down there, and then we're starting way over at square one. I'd rather be here and they get out of the sling, and then we can kind of catch up from that. Now that doesn't always go over very well or get agreed with, but I do my best, and then try to modify the best I can and write programs the best I can to kind of get that point across. Closed chain versus open chain. So if a closed chain exercise is bothering a student athlete, maybe we make it an open chain. If we have an open chain scheduled, maybe we make it a closed chain. Usually the best example for that that seems to go over the best is any type of pressing, and then we just sub in a push-up variation for that, because typically for the most part push-ups will feel better for someone than like an open chain pressing. So that's probably the biggest use of that one. Maybe we make a static, turn it into a static exercise. If all pressing and through that whole range of motion doesn't feel good for push-ups, we can do some plank variations, with that, or like a squat hold would be a good example of that. And I'll go into more examples. Maybe we can just bypass that injury or ache, and I'll show a couple of examples of that here in a little bit. But as always, I should have mentioned this on the slide before. We want to kind of clear all these with our athletic trainer, physical therapist, doctor, kind of whoever we work with. Run these by them. If you don't, if you work in the private sector and you don't know who that is, reach out to them, kind of develop that relationship with whoever your client's doctor is, physical therapist, because you kind of want to build that team, and that, I don't know if camaraderie is the word I want to use, but build that relationship with them so you can kind of bounce ideas off them. They can give you suggestions, you can give them suggestions. So yeah, always clear with them, but then from that side, but also reach out to them and kind of build that trust and build that team. Do that. All right, so what are some other considerations that I think about whenever we have that list of all the different things we can do, and there's more than that. That was just a little list. But what are some different things I think about whenever I'm modifying for an athlete? Number one, safety. I think athletes have to keep their safety in mind. If they're getting hurt in the weight room, I'm not doing my job right. Something's up if the athlete's safety is compromised. Number two is their goal. If I'm going to treat, if I got a student athlete like the basketball player that needs to gain weight, like he's going to have a different modification than somebody that lacks no coordination, no self-awareness, and has no stability or anything like that. So kind of back to those pyramids earlier, like whatever their need is, we need that's going to factor in, how we modify some stuff. And kind of along those lines is you have to know, if the goal is the goal, we kind of have to know what the goal is if we're going to get there. And then along those same lines is I have to know where I'm at if I'm going to know where I'm going. Like it's kind of hard to get to Manchester if I don't know if I'm in Fort Wayne or Chicago or Indy. So you kind of have to know where you're going before you can kind of help someone get there. Level of athletes training. If I have somebody that's been there for 4 days, that modification is going to be different than somebody that's been there for 4 years. Not only because, that training age, but also that trust and like, hey, if it's a athlete that's been there for 4 years, it might be like, all right, why don't you try A and B and just tell me which one feels better, and then we'll kind of roll with that. Where if it's somebody that's been there 4 days and has never really had a training program, I probably won't give them as much leeway. It's probably just going to be, all right, why don't you do this and let me know how that feels. Where if it's an athlete with a higher training age, that I've worked with for a while, I might give them two, 3 options to kind of play around with and let me know which works best for them. And then time of year. So if we have a conference tournament game in 4 days and it's, Coach, my elbow hurts when I do X, I'm going to be very, very, very cautious with what I have them do next. Whereas if same athlete and it's June for the basketball player, like we can, keeping safety in mind first, obviously, and I wouldn't say riskier, but we can kind of push that envelope a little bit more for that student athlete. Obviously, depending on, what the issue is, and clearing it with the AT, PT, and doc. But kind of depending on that time of year and that training schedule, we can kind of change things, looking at that. A few more considerations, the size of team and group. If I have, a golf team of 9 players and a baseball team of 30, I'll give, if I give a modification to a baseball guy, it's going to be something that I know he can do right away. Whereas if it's a golfer, we might try something a little riskier, and I can kind of give him a little more attention, because I can give, an individual on a team of 9 a lot more attention than I can give an individual with a team of 30. So that's going to be another factor, just the size of the team and the group. Equipment, if we're in a weight room, awesome. We were getting some work done at our facility, so we were lifting off-site and practicing off-site. So like those modifications are going to be totally different too, just because I don't know, all right, we're going to show up here and so needs this modification. I don't really know what's there until I get there. So just that facility, your equipment available will kind of dictate what you modify and how you modify. And then from like a staff perspective, a personal perspective, it's got to be something I can feel very confident in coaching. Now, along those lines, like we still need, just like athletes need reps, performing a movement, we need those reps kind of coaching that movement, but it's going to be kind of hard to modify, kind of like what I'd mentioned with the size of the team. If there's a new lift that I kind of want to try, I'm probably not going to have the baseball player do it whenever I can't really give him the attention and the focus that I need. So it's something I got to be pretty confident that I can coach very easily, very quickly, and something that he or she can do very well already. And then when all else fails, the KISS method, and that we, just keep it simple. Like, I think I can get in the habit of overthinking things way too much. So at the end of the day, as long as the athlete's doing something that kind of gets them closer to the goal and is safe, like, I think that's probably the best modification for them. So just kind of keeping that simple. All right, so what are just a few different examples of this? So kind of like, I'm going to take this from like a weight room training perspective, the modifications. So typically when I program, we'll do like a full body lift, full body training session every day. So we'll do some variation of a squat, a hinge or a deadlift, upper body push and a pull. And some days it might be heavy lower body, light lower body, and the vice versa. But we'll kind of train those movements all the time. Kind of like what I mentioned earlier, is that we want to build that consistency with our student athletes. So we want them to get as much training time with those movements as we can. For example, let's say we're front squatting today. And so this is just kind of how I program. It's not like everybody's going to do this, but this is just an example. So like, I'll leave some time at the end. So if we have any questions or somebody's got any other lifts that they're kind of curious about, we can kind of talk through that. So a front squat is scheduled for that day. Maybe we decrease the range of motion if that end range of motion's bother them, so we can squat to a box. We can have that athlete just stay above that, wherever that range of motion is that bothers them. We can just stay above that. We can regress that to a goblet squat. Close, open chain. We don't have access to a leg press readily available in our facility, but maybe you could just have that athlete leg press that day. A body squat hold with a heartbeat, so just sitting down that bottom. If that bottom position is fine to sit in, but just kind of that constant moving up. Usually I'll see this in athletes with like some patella tendonitis or something like that. Just that constant up and down kind of bothers them, but once they get there, they're fine. So maybe they'll do a squat hold with like a heartbeat to kind of make that a little more challenging. Maybe we can bypass the joint or injury altogether. I spoke of the basketball player who needed to get weight, but his arm was in a sling. So we would kind of fashion up a belt squat so that he could get some load on his lower body, but didn't have anything resting on his shoulders. And then like a single limb, we can increase stability demands. So maybe you squat, single leg squat off a box, to a box. Do like an airborne lunge. Just a couple different thoughts to kind of go with that. And then so building off, so we talked about lower body squats, and now we'll do like an upper body pressing pattern or a bench press. We can decrease that range of motion if you wanted to keep that base exercise of a bench press. You can floor press, board press, because typically the athletes I see is just getting that bar all the way down is kind of where we run into the most problems with. So we'll floor press, board press with them. And like I say, like, it's going to depend on that athlete. Like if it's an athlete that needs to get bigger, stronger, we might do that. If it's a four-year starter and it's mid-season and they're in the middle of that grind, like we'll probably just do push-ups until their career's over with. Closed chain versus open chain, I'd kind of mention that. So if any kind of open chain pressing bothers them, we'll just regress to a push-up variation. You can get as creative and challenging as you want with push-ups. I feel like typically when I talk with athletes, and a push-up is kind of like looked down upon, and they're like, oh, it's too easy, I can't get anything out of this. But you can, for one, most of them don't do it right, so you got to coach it a lot. And then two, we can get creative and make them pretty challenging and get a great workout from that. Static isometric, maybe we just do a front bridge. Same idea, we can make those challenging. in the single limb or increased stability demands. We do like a lot of one-arm bench pressing or like the kettlebell bottoms-up pressing to kind of increase that stability component of those. Pull pattern, I see this a lot in like baseball, overhead athletes, kind of what Coach was saying, like getting those arms up over the head, so like maybe a full range chin up. Once they get to that hang position, really bothers them, so we'll just do like top half of a chin up. Sometimes any type of motion kind of bothers them, so we might just do this kind of skipping ahead, but like the static, so we'll just do like a chin up hold up at the top. And then you can get anywhere, if that's easy, but moving it a lot is too hard, like we'll just come down to like a 90-degree angle at that elbow to do those. We can regress it, chin ups to an inverted row, which still, like a lot of student athletes think those are way too easy, but then they're doing them at like a 45-degree angle, like as they lean back and do a TRX row where, getting more horizontal and legs straight kind of increases the intensity of that for them. Closed chain versus open chain, so maybe we do inverted rows or we just do some one-arm rows or chest-supported rows. And then kind of bypassing that joint. So if somebody's got like a wrist issue and any type of pulling on that wrist kind of bothers it, we'll do something. I call it a hand release hold, which is just, hopefully this doesn't screw up the mic, but maybe they're here and then just hold here. And you could do, arms out and do like a T up into an I, just so we kind of get some scapular strength going on there. And then single limb, some examples of single limb. So one arm TRX row, one arm rows, and different variations out of that. Hinge pattern, so we kind of build up to a trap bar deadlift. It's kind of like our top progression, I guess you could say. Decreasing range of motion on that, kind of like what I had said, like an RDL, maybe you just pull from a block. And some people might, if RDLs feel great and a trap bar deadlift doesn't, like if they RDL for 4 years that they're with me, like, I'm fine with that. I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody into doing a certain lift. If RDLs, deadlift from blocks feel great, like we'll just ride that train with them as much as we can. Regressing the exercise into like a kettlebell belly RDL. Sometimes, a closed chain versus an open chain. So maybe we just like reverse hyperextensions. A static would just be like your basic glute bridge. And those are typically pretty easy, so we can go single leg with that to make that a little bit more challenging. And sometimes I've had athletes with like an ankle injury, but we still kind of want to train that hinge motion, so we can do like a reverse hyper. And we don't have reverse hyper machines, but we just have we'll just do it off a bench, and we'll just do holds instead of reps. We'll just do it off a bench. And then single leg. Increased stability demands, maybe we do a single leg RDL. And sometimes even those, like if I have a bar or a weight, just kind of that loading vector kind of bothers some student athletes. So if we take a band or a cable column and kind of change that angle, we can kind of help them kind of through that too. So we can still change that motion, but kind of changing that loading vector is kind of another way that we kind of do it. But yeah, I wanted to save a little bit of time at the end, just to kind of get any questions. If anybody's got any exercises that they do that that they have questions on modifying or anything out of that.
Do you find like most of your athletes are pretty responsive when bringing like so obviously yeah. I jam my fingers, jam my hand, can't do anything with my upper body. All right, well let's get you on something like a belt squat or something free range that's not going to utilize the top half. Do they kind of jump on that, or is it all kind of?
I think it's probably the same athletes. Yes and no to answer is the.
Yeah.
Probably you know, probably the same athletes that go hard in training are going to be the same athletes that, like, if you say, all right, well, let's belt squat, like they're on it. Like they're like, yes, thank you for giving me something to do. Whereas the athletes that are like every day in the weight room, it's like, where's so-and-so? It's like, oh, they're over there dancing, listening to the music. Yeah, you know, so it's probably the same, but even so, like kind of like what I mentioned earlier, like I kind of want to get across to them that, like, hey, no matter what, like you're going to do something. Like this isn't optional in that, like, hey, jam my fingers, so I'm just going to go down to the training room and just chill down there for the rest of the time. So like I kind of like stress it early, like when they're healthy, like, hey, we're going to do something. And I think when they see their teammates, like so-and-so had shoulder surgery and they're in here doing X, Y, Z, it kind of helps them know, like, all right, well, I have a hangnail, like I'm going to have to do something too. Yeah, if that kind of helps, if that kind of answers your question. But yeah, like, yeah, like, like I said, like the same athletes that push themselves and their teammates are always going to be looking for something to do. And they're probably the ones, too, that are kind of like that brick wall method where, like, they're going to be the ones that you kind of have to, like, hey, you're not going to do this, you're going to do this, you know, as well. Yeah, if nobody has any further questions, yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to my spiel up here. And then that's my contact info. If there's something you think of later or didn't want to ask, yeah, feel free to reach out. Yeah, or if you ever want to stop by, if you're ever in Fort Wayne and want to stop by, like always an open door, open invitation to check out. If you just want to watch, if you want to talk shop, cool. If you want to check out a training session or whatever, yeah, door is always open. I'm not doing anything top secret or revolutionary in there. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you.